They came to starve a station. They were sure of the arithmetic. They lost a war to a freighter. The Sarkoth Dominion did not believe in luck. It believed in numbers, and it had run the numbers twice. For 11 months, the cordon had held its shape around Meridian Station. 214 warships strung in a slow ring above the gas giant Kesh. And in 11 months, not one crate of grain had reached the people inside. That was the plan. The plan was working. On the flag deck of the dreadnought Sarkoth Khan, War Master Keswick stood at the tactical plot and watched the station turn, a small, bright coin against the storm bands of the planet below. He had watched it turn for 340 days. He knew its rhythm the way a man knows the ticking of a clock in a room he cannot leave. Keswick was not a cruel commander. He would have told you so himself in the flat, clipped speech of the Dominion Officer Corps, and he would have believed it. He did not enjoy the siege. He enjoyed its certainty. Starvation was clean. It did not require him to spend ships. A blockade, when you stripped away the poetry, was a ledger with hulls attached, and Keswick was very good at ledgers. The station held 41,000 people. He knew that number the way he knew his own rank. 41,000, minus whatever the last 3 months had taken, and he assumed it had taken a great deal. His analysts said 30 days of food remained, perhaps less. His analysts had been saying 30 days of food for some time now, which troubled a small part of him he did not name and did not feed. A junior officer approached the plot with a data slate held level, the way they were trained to hold it, and waited to be seen. Keswick let him wait. He had learned long ago that the first lesson of command was the length of a pause. "Report," he said at last. "Contact, War Master," the officer said. "A formation translating in from the outer marker, bearing rimward, decelerating hard, 60 hulls." Keswick did not turn from the plot. "Warships?" he asked, though it was not truly a question. "No, War Master," the officer said. "Freighters, bulk carriers, slow mass profiles, no gun signatures, no fighter wings, cargo." And there it was, the small, warm settling of a thing that has happened before and will happen the same way again. Keswick had seen 3 of these already. He had ended 3 of these already. The humans of the Meridian Compact were a stubborn people. He would grant them that. And they loved their station the way small powers always love the thing they could not defend. They kept sending food. He kept turning it into wreckage. 22 ships, across 3 attempts, drifting now in cold pieces along the outer marker where his interdiction buoys had caught them and his gunships had finished the work. He felt no particular pride in it. It was arithmetic. It was avoidance. There was a word for what a great power did when it stopped fighting battles because battles cost hulls. And the word was patience. And patience was cheaper than courage every day of the year. "Show me the profiles," Keswick said, and the plot bloomed with 60 slow amber shapes, fat and round and harmless, the profile of a merchant marine that had never learned to be anything else. He studied them the way a man studies a bill he already knows the total of. "Confirm the count," he said. 60 confirmed, the officer said. Bulk carriers of the Kestrel Registry. Lead vessels squawking a relief manifest. Grain, medical stores, water reclamation parts. Keswick almost smiled and did not, because Dominion officers did not smile on the flag deck. It was, he thought, just another supply convoy. He said it aloud because saying the obvious to junior officers was part of teaching them to think. "It is just another supply convoy," he said. "They will decelerate into the outer marker. The buoys will pin them. The gunships will do the rest. We will not spend more than an hour on it." Around the flag deck, the watch officers relaxed by a degree that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent 11 months learning to read them. This was known ground. This was a ledger balancing itself. Keswick turned back to the window, to the storm bands in the small bright coin of the station, and he gave the order in the flattest voice he owned, the voice that made an execution sound like a supply request. "Continue the cordon," he said. Bring the outer squadron to readiness. And when the freighters reach the marker, do what we did to the others. What Keswick did not know, what no one on the flag deck of the Sarkoth Khan had yet understood, was that the assessment he trusted, the neat amber profiles, the 3 easy victories, the 22 dead ships, all of it rested on a picture of humanity that was 20 years out of date. The Dominion had fought the humans once before, a short, ugly border war 2 decades gone, and had beaten them badly, and had filed the humans away as a slow logistic species, brave and poor and easily strangled. That file had not been updated. Files rarely are, in institutions certain of their own weight. And in the 20 years since, while the Dominion perfected the art of the patient blockade, the humans had gone quiet and done the one thing the Dominion never thought to watch for. They had gone home to Earth and built warehouses. Aboard the lead freighter, 50 light minutes out in closing, a woman named Priya Nandakumar leaned over a sensor board and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "They see us. They see exactly what we want them to see." And somewhere in the belly of that same ship, past the crew spaces and the reactor shielding, 60,000 tons of perfectly ordinary cargo sat in the dark, stacked in its cell guides exactly the way grain would have been stacked, and waited to be asked a question. Keswick gave the order to proceed. He was certain. He was, in the way that would matter, already too late. 212 hours before the freighters reached the marker, the Sarkoth Dominion held a war council, and a woman tried to stop the thing that was coming and was overruled by a form. The council chamber aboard the Sarkoth Khan was a hard, cold room with a hard, cold table, lit from below in the Dominion fashion so that every face at the table looked slightly like a mask of itself. Keswick sat at the head. Down the sides sat his squadron wardens, his logistics chief, his interdiction officer, and, at the far end where the least important people are always seated, a xenologist named Reader Osa, who had been attached to the fleet 11 months ago and had not been listened to in 10 of them. Osa was not a soldier. She wore the pale sash of the Dominion academies, and she carried always a battered reader tablet loaded with human transmissions, human trade records, human engineering journals scraped from 20 years of open broadcasts. She had asked to speak at 9 councils. She had spoken at 2. She asked again now. "War Master," she said, and the title bought her 3 seconds. "I want to record a concern about the incoming convoy." Keswick did not look up from his slate. "Recorded," he said. "It is not the same as the others," Osa said. Keswick looked up then, because a flat contradiction from the end of the table was rare enough to be interesting. "Explain," he said. Osa stood. She was not good at rooms like this, and everyone in the room knew it, and she pressed on anyway, which was the only brave thing about her, and also the only thing that mattered. "The first 3 convoys were commercial charters," she said. "Real merchants, hired hulls, crews who wanted to live. This one is not. Look at the registry. Kestrel is not a shipping line. It is a designation. It is the Meridian Compact's merchant reserve, called up entire and sailing under naval orders, which is not the same thing as a war fleet and is in some ways worse. The formation keeping is too clean. Charter crews scatter. This convoy holds station to within 100 kilometers across 60 ships. Charter crews cannot do that. Crews who have drilled the same standard, hold on the same standard schedule for 19 years can. The interdiction officer, a heavy, skeptical man named Torv, made a low sound. "So they hired better pilots," he said. Asa turned to him. "Where are the guns?" she said. Torb spread his hands. "There are no guns." "Exactly," Asa said. 60 ships, no guns, sailing straight at 200 warships that have already killed 3 convoys. Either they are fools or they are carrying something that does not look like a gun. And in 20 years of listening to them, I have learned one thing about these people. They are not fools about logistics. It is the only thing they are never fools about. The room was quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when a junior person has said something the senior people would prefer to have said themselves. Keswick studied her. He was not a stupid man, and some cold analytic part of him heard the shape of what she was saying and did not entirely dislike it. But he was a commander of 200 ships, 11 months into a siege that was working. And there is a gravity to a plan that is working, and that gravity bends the men inside it. "What do you recommend, reader?" he asked. "Do not let them reach the marker," Asa said. "Engage them in open space, far out, where you can maneuver and they cannot hide behind the cargo profile. Or better, open a corridor. Let one ship through with the food and destroy the rest. Break the formation before you learn what the formation is for." Torv laughed, short and hard. "Open a corridor," he said. 11 months of cordon and she wants us to open the door." The logistics chief nodded along. The squadron wardens looked at Keswick to see which way the wind would blow so they could blow with it. And Keswick, who felt the cold, analytic part of himself, agreeing with the woman at the end of the table, did the thing that men in his position have done in every war that was ever fought. He deferred to the process. "The assessment," he said, "is that these are bulk carriers on a relief run, and that our doctrine handles bulk carriers on a relief run. I will not rewrite 11 months of doctrine on a hunch from the academy." He was not unkind about it. That was almost the worst part. "Your concern is recorded, reader Asa," he said. "It will go in the log. If you are right, the log will show you were right." Asa did not sit down right away. She looked at him, and she said the thing that would be quoted for the rest of the war, the thing that would be read back to him in a colder room on a worse day. And she said it quietly, without heat, the way you tell someone the bridge ahead is out. "You are treating a warehouse like a wagon," she said. "That is the mistake these people are built to punish." Then she sat down. Keswick let the silence hold for exactly the length of a pause that ends a discussion, and then he closed his slate. "The cordon holds," he said. "We engage at the marker. We do what we did to the others. Continue as planned." The council broke. The wardens filed out to their squadrons, relieved, certain, already thinking of other things. Torv clapped Asa on the shoulder on his way past, not unkindly, the way you touch someone whose worry has been noted and dismissed and forgiven all at once. Reader Asa gathered her battered tablet and did not move for a while. She had been right in that room. She would be right in the days after it. And being right, she was beginning to understand, was going to cost her nothing and save no one, which is the particular loneliness of the analyst who is heard and not believed. She opened her tablet to a human engineering journal she had read 40 times, a dry public paper on modular cargo standardization, published on Earth 19 years earlier. And she read again the line she had underlined, the line no one at the table would have found frightening, the line that said the container is the weapon of the modern age, because the container is what lets you move anything, in any quantity, faster than your enemy can count it. She turned off the tablet. Outside the viewport, the convoy was a cluster of amber dots, closing. She did not sleep that night. She sat with what she knew, which is its own kind of scene, a woman alone in a cold room, holding a fact no one wanted. And she waited for the day to prove her right. And she took no pleasure at all in how sure she was. The convoy crossed the outer marker at 1100 hours ship time. And for the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. And the nothing was the loudest thing on the flag deck. War Master Keswick stood at the plot and watched 60 amber shapes glide across the invisible line where his interdiction buoys lived, the line that had killed 3 convoys, and he waited for the pinning to begin. The interdiction net was the heart of the siege. It was not glamorous. It was a lattice of 400 buoys, each one a squat drum of field generators and reactor mass, arranged in a shell around the station at the outer marker. And its single job was to make the fabric of space too rough for a ship to fold across. Come to the marker under drive, and the net would seize you, drag you out of any attempt to fold away, and hold you in normal space long enough for the gunships to arrive. Every convoy so far had translated in, tried to sprint the last leg, hit the net, and died pinned and helpless, while Keswick squadrons picked them apart at leisure. It was a beautiful piece of avoidance. It let 200 ships do the work of 1,000. Now the fourth convoy crossed the marker, and the net reached for it. And the convoy did not sprint. It decelerated, it slowed, and it spread, and it turned its fat, vulnerable flanks toward the Dominion cordon as if it had all the time in the world. And Keswick felt the first thin thread of wrongness pull tight in his chest. "They are not running," said Sub-Warden Vore at his side quietly. Vore was Keswick's second, a careful man who had survived 3 commanders by knowing exactly how far a question could be pushed. "No," Keswick said, "they are not." Vore let a moment pass. "War Master," he said, "the profile has not changed. Still no guns, still cargo." Keswick did not answer right away. Down on the plot, one of the 60 freighters, the lead ship, had come to a near halt just inside the marker, and it was doing something. A small forward hatch opened, and out of it came a single, unpowered pod on a slow ballistic line toward the cordon. No drive, no escort, nothing aboard it that could hurt anyone. Torv read the transmission off it, and his voice went strange. "War Master," he said, "it is a manifest. Sealed holds, tonnage by bay, crew list by name. They are requesting inspection under the Kesh Transit Accords and asking us to pass a humanitarian cargo, and they have filed the request in clear, on an open channel, to every listening post in the system." Keswick looked at the soft, slow, harmless thing crawling across his plot and understood exactly what it was, which was not a request. It was a record. "Denied," he said. "Log it." He said it in the flat voice, and the officer of the watch entered it in the flag log at 1109, 6 words long. "Request for inspection denied, cordon holds." That entry was cut out of the wreck of the Sarkoth Khan by the salvage crews who worked the debris field after the battle. And it was read aloud, eventually, in a bare room on the 3rd ring of Meridian Station, by a woman with a thin folder, somewhere in the outer dark, unseen by anyone on the flag deck. A thing that had been prepared for 19 years began, very quietly, to happen. But that was not yet, and the first blood of the day was not fired by a gun at all. It was refused by a man with a wrench. Aboard the freighter Ardent, 3rd ship in the 2nd rank, a deckhand named Saul Ferraro was on his knees in Cargo Bay 4, with his arm shoulder-deep in a jammed cell mechanism, and a Dominion boarding skiff was 30 seconds from his hull. The Ardent had strayed. A drive fault in the 2nd rank had left her lagging, exposed, and a Dominion picket, hungry for an easy kill, and not yet understanding there were no easy kills today, had launched a boarding action to take the freighter intact. A prize, a propaganda hull full of grain to parade. The skiff clamped on. Dominion troopers cut the outer lock. And the captain of the Ardent, a tired woman named Okafor, gave the order to open the reactor vents and cook the boarders in the corridor. And the order required Cargo Bay 4 to seal, and Cargo Bay 4 would not seal because cell mechanism 9 was jammed. And jammed meant the whole bay stayed depressurized. And depressurized meant the vent trick would not work, and the boarders would take the ship. "Ferraro," said the captain over the bay speaker, "seal 4 or we are boarded." Ferraro did not answer. He did not have a hand free to key the mic. He had both hands inside a mechanism the size of a coffin, feeling for the seized gear, and he found it, and it would not turn, and there was no time to find the tool, so he set his boots against the frame, and he pulled with his whole body against a piece of steel that was never meant to move by hand. It moved. The gear turned. The bay sealed with a bang he felt in his teeth. 2 decks up, the reactor vents opened, and the boarding corridor filled with fire, and the skiff blew clear of the hull, trailing bodies, and the Ardent lived. Ferraro sat back on the deck plating, breathing hard, his arm bleeding where the gear had caught it, and he keyed the mic at last and said, "4 is sealed," in the flat voice of a man reporting a minor delay. Then he wrapped his arm in a rag, and he went back to work, because there were 40 more cells in Bay 4, and every one of them would be needed before this was done. And he never mentioned the thing he had done. Not that day, and not in the years after, when people who did not know his name would try to give it a name. On the flag deck, Keswick saw the boarding skiff die and did not understand it. A routine action, a routine skiff, gone in a flash of vented plasma. He waited for a report. The report, when it came, said only that the Picket had lost its boarding party to a defensive vent and withdrawn. It did not say why a defenseless freighter had held a bay sealed under fire with no bay crew to spare. Small incidents. Keswick had built a career on knowing which small incidents mattered. This one he filed as bad luck and turned away from. And that was the second mistake, though he would not learn to call it that until much later. "Confirm the count," he said, out of habit, the words a comfort now. "60 confirmed, War Master," said Vor, and then Vor paused, reading his board, and the pause was too long. "War Master," he said, "one of the freighters just went dark. All emissions, reactor, drive, transponder, gone." "Which one?" Keswick asked. Vor looked up, and for the first time in 11 months, Keswick saw something in his careful second's face that he did not like at all. "We do not know," Vor said. "That is the problem. It did not explode. It did not surrender. It simply stopped being a ship on our board, and we cannot find where it went." Keswick looked at 59 amber shapes in a place where there had been 60. "Find it," he said. "It is a freighter. It cannot have gone far." It had not gone far. It had gone cold, which is a different thing, and it would be 20 days before anyone in the Dominion learned the difference. To understand what happened next, you have to leave the flag deck of the Sarkoth Khan and cross 40 light minutes of cold, empty space, and step onto the cargo deck of a ship that the Dominion had just spent 11 months refusing to take seriously. Aboard the flagship of Task Group Kestrel, a bulk carrier named Providence, loaded with 60,000 tons of cargo that any dockhand in human space would have recognized on sight, and no Dominion officer alive could read it all, Commodore Elias Reyes stood in a room that was, by any honest measure, ugly. The command deck of a converted freighter was not a place built for glory. The overhead was a nest of exposed conduit painted the flat gray of the surplus yards. One light panel above the plot flickered on a 2-second cycle and had flickered for the entire deployment because the part to fix it was not on the manifest, and the manifest was full of things that mattered more. There was a coffee urn bolted to the bulkhead that produced something brown and bitter, and only technically warm, and every officer on the deck had a cup of it going cold at their elbow. Reyes was 58 years old. He had commanded logistics squadrons for 30 of those years, the least glamorous branch of the least glamorous service, the branch that moved the beans and the bullets and never made the recruiting posters. He had a lined, tired face and slow, careful hands, and in the top drawer of the console beside him, under a stack of maintenance forms, he kept a small brass house key that did not open anything within 400 light years, and he touched the drawer once, the way another man might touch a metal, and then he put his hands flat on the plot and looked at the picture of the Dominion cordon and said quietly, "Tell me the honest number." Lieutenant Priya Nandakumar answered from the sensor board. 214 warships confirmed, she said. Interdiction net at full strength across the outer marker. Their doctrine is holding. They think we are the 4th convoy. Reyes nodded slowly. "And us," he said. 60 hulls, said Priya. 56 carriers, 3 tugs, and the longshore. Loaded. Reyes looked at the number, and around him the deck was very quiet, because everyone on it understood the arithmetic they were sitting inside, and the arithmetic was insane. 214 warships, 60 unarmed freighters. On paper, everything about this was a slaughter. On paper, Reyes had brought bulk carriers to a battleship fight. But the paper was the whole trick, and Reyes had spent 19 years building the trick, and now he explained it, one more time, to a deck full of people who already knew it, because saying it aloud was how you kept your hands steady. "We are not going to fight their fleet," he said. "We cannot. Ship for ship, they would end us in 20 minutes. So we are not going to be ships. We are going to be a warehouse that arrived. Every carrier out there holds 700 cargo cells, 700 in the same cell guides that hold grain, because 19 years ago we decided that every hold in human space, from Earth outward, would take the same box. And in every one of those cells sits one standard cargo module, 20 tons of sintered slag, with a commercial drop booster bolted to its base and a guidance brain the size of a coin bolted to its face. The booster is the part that puts a container down onto a colony without cracking it. The brain is the part that lands it on the pad instead of on the schoolhouse. Neither of them was built for a war. Neither of them cost more than a week of station rations. Nothing out there was built for a war. That is the entire point of this. 56 carriers, 700 cells each. He let the numbers sit in the ugly flickering light. 39,200 modules in the tubes, said Priya, because someone had to say it, and 3 more loads in the magazines behind them. Reyes touched the plot. "We do not have to be stronger than their fleet," he said. "We only have to be more numerous than their point defense can count. Their guns can each track and kill so many targets a minute. That is a number. It is a real number, and we know it, because they published their own doctrine 20 years ago and never revised it, and we did. 30 tracks a minute a hull, their own manual, page 406, 214 hulls, 4 minutes of flight time, 25,680 kills. If every gun works and every gun is pointed the right way, and neither of those things has ever been true of anybody's guns in the history of shooting. We are sending 39,200. The rest is subtraction. And when we open every cell in this convoy at once, we do not send them a fleet, we send them a flood. And you cannot blockade a flood. You can only drown in it." And then he said the part no recruiting poster would ever have understood, which was why 60 hulls at all. "A year of food for 41,000 people is 22,000 tons, he said. "That is one hull, a third full. That hull is the longshore, and by now she has shut down every system aboard her that makes light or heat or noise, and she is running cold and ballistic on a line that was laid in before we left Holland. And she will arrive at Meridian in 20 days, whether any of the rest of us are alive or not, because the delivery is the mission, and we are the escort. The other 59 hulls out here are not the cargo. They are what it costs to get the cargo through. That is what a convoy is. That is what a convoy has always been. It was the thesis of his whole career, spoken in a room with a flickering light and cold coffee, and no one cheered, because his people were not the cheering kind, and because the thing he was describing was going to kill a great many living beings, and Reyes had never once let his people pretend otherwise. There was a young rating on the deck, 19, first deployment, and she asked the question the youngest person always asks. "Sir," she said, "what if they figure it out first? What if they scatter the net and hit us before we open the bays?" Reyes did not answer right away. He looked at the plot, at the great patient ring of Dominion steel, and at the small dark station behind it holding 41,000 people and 30 days of food. And he said the 2 words he would say more than any others across the days to come. The 2 words that were the whole discipline of the thing. The 2 words that meant everything and gave nothing away. "Not yet," he said. "We hold formation. We look harmless. We let them keep their assessment as long as they will hold it, because their assessment is the only shield we have. And the moment they stop believing we are freighters, we are dead. So we stay freighters. We stay slow. we stay boring, until we are close enough that the flood cannot be counted. And then we are not yet, until we are. Down on the cargo deck, 3 ranks back, on the freighter Ardent, Saul Ferraro finished bandaging his arm and looked at the wall of cells filling the bay from deck to overhead, 40 of them in Bay 4, and 660 more in the bays forward, every cell holding the same plain steel box he had spent 19 years loading with grain. And he did not think about arithmetic at all. He thought about the station. He had a cousin on Meridian, a hydroponics tech, a woman who sent him bad jokes on the trade relays until the siege cut the relays 11 months ago. He did not know if she was alive. He did not talk about it. He picked up his wrench and he walked the length of Bay 4, and he checked every cell mechanism by hand, one after another, 40 of them, tightening what was loose and freeing what was jammed. A small, unremarkable act by a man with no rank and no plan. And when he was done, he leaned on the last cell and said quietly, to a wall of boxes that could not hear him, "All right, let us go get her some groceries." And on the flagship, Commodore Reyes gave no order at all, which was itself the order, and 59 freighters slid deeper into the killing ground at the pace of a funeral, patient, harmless, boring, waiting to be told, "Not yet," while a 60th fell away from them in the dark, cold and blind and silent, on a line it had been given before any of this began. The thing about attrition is that it does not announce itself. It arrives as a series of small numbers that each mean nothing and together mean everything. And by the time the total is large enough to frighten you, the total is already too large to fix. For 30 hours after the convoy crossed the marker, the Sarkoth Dominion did exactly what its doctrine told it to do. And its doctrine, it turned out, had a leak. The freighters would not close to knife range and would not run. So Keswick did the reasonable thing and sent his outer squadrons to worry them, to snipe from the edges, to peel off the stragglers the way his gunships had peeled off the 3 convoys before. And the freighters bled. 2 carriers took long-range fire and fell out of formation, dark and dead. A tug was crippled and fell behind and was finished at leisure. The convoy did not respond. It absorbed the losses in silence and held its slow course. And to Keswick, that silence read as helplessness. A merchant fleet too poorly armed to shoot back, dying quietly the way merchants die. That was the assessment. The assessment was wrong, and it was wrong in a way that flattered him, which is the most dangerous way for an assessment to be wrong. What the losses actually cost the Dominion was information, because every gunship that closed to fire came home with a scan, and Reader Asa read every scan, and every scan told her the same impossible thing. "War Master," she said at the 4th briefing in 2 days, standing again at the end of the cold table, "the freighters are not fighting back because they do not want us to see what they are, but the mass readings are wrong. A grain carrier full of grain has a certain density. These do not have that density. They are packed with something denser, arranged in a lattice, in regular cells." Torv, the interdiction officer, sighed the sigh of a man hearing a bad song for the 2nd time. "Ammunition stores for the station," he said. "They are carrying military supply. We knew that." "No," Asa said, "not stores, something cellular, something modular, something that comes in units of 700. And she put the number on the display, the number she had reconstructed from 4 dead ships and 19 years of open journals. And the number was 39,000. And she said, "Whatever those ships are carrying, they are carrying tens of thousands of it, and it is not food, and it is arranged to be released all at once." Keswick looked at the number for a long moment. And here the story turns on the smallest of hinges, because Keswick almost believed her. Some cold part of him, the part that had agreed with her in the first council and been overruled by his own plan, looked at the lattice density in the units of 700 and felt the floor of his certainty shift. He could have opened the corridor even then. He could have pulled his outer squadrons back inside the net and made the freighters come to his guns, instead of sending his guns out to be scanned. He was, in that moment, 3 sentences away from winning. But a commander 11 months into a working siege does not unbelieve his siege on the word of an academy reader and a density reading, and above Keswick there was a voice he answered to. And he made the mistake that distant authorities exist to cause. He asked the directorate. The Coreward Directorate was the strategic command of the Sarkoth Dominion, a body of grave and distant persons who had never seen Meridian Station with their own eyes and never would. Keswick composed a careful message. He laid out ASA's density readings, the units of 700, the possibility that the convoy was an unknown weapon system rather than a relief run, and he requested authorization to alter doctrine, to open a corridor, to break the formation before it could be used. He sent it into the dark and waited 9 hours for the fold relay to make the round trip. And the answer came back, and it was 6 words long, and it was the same 6 words the directorate had sent when he first requested reinforcement, and the same 6 words it had sent when he requested the siege be reviewed at month 8. The assessment stands, it said. Maintain the cordon. Keswick read it 3 times. Then he read it again. He set the slate down on the cold table very gently, the way you set down a thing you would like to throw, and Vore, watching him, understood that his commander had just been handed the freedom to do nothing and the responsibility for whatever nothing produced. Reader Asa was not in the room when the answer came. She learned of it from Vore, in a corridor, in the flat, careful way one professional tells another that the argument is over. The assessment stands, Vore said. I am sorry, reader, you made the case. Asa did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked the only question left. And when we find out what they are carrying, she said, will anyone remember that I told them what it was? Vore did not answer, which was an answer. The convoy came on. Its losses, as the Dominion counted them, now stood at 4 hulls in 30 hours, 3 of them killed and 1 of them simply gone. And it had not fired a single shot. And to the 214 warships of the cordon, this looked like victory arriving on schedule. To Keswick, alone at the plot in the small hours, watching the flickering amber shapes crawl toward the station, it looked like something he could no longer quite name, a wrongness that had a density and a shape and a unit of 700. And he stood there in the recycled cold and did the arithmetic he had trusted his whole life. 200 ships against 60 freighters. And for the first time the arithmetic did not comfort him, because there was a term in the equation he could not see. And a term you cannot see is not a small term. It is the only one that matters. The count of surviving freighters was 56. He would remember that number later, the way a man remembers the last ordinary hour of his life, because it was the last count he ever took that turned out to mean anything. The wall the humans could not break was not the fleet. The fleet was arithmetic, and the humans were good at arithmetic. The wall was the interdiction net, and for 19 days the best minds on the flagship Providence had thrown themselves at it and bounced off, because the net did exactly what it was built to do, and what it was built to do was make their entire plan impossible. Here was the problem, stated plainly, the way the problem solvers stated it to each other in the bad hours. The flood only worked if the convoy released it from close range. Dropped from far out, the modules would coast for hours on a booster built to nudge a container down a gravity well, and point defense would pick them off 1 box at a time, spread too thin across too much space. To drown the cordon, the convoy had to be inside the ring of warships, at knife range, and open every cell at once where the guns could not track fast enough. And the net made that impossible, not by stopping them, but by slowing them. The field filled the whole volume the buoys enclosed, and inside that volume nothing folded, not the freighters, not the cordon, not anyone. So the convoy could not jump the gap. It could only cross it the long way, under drive, slow and lit and exposed, 1,000 hours of open space between the marker and the ring, which was what it was doing. And 1,000 hours was not just ships. Reyes had said it on the first day, and he said it every day after. Their assessment is the only shield we have. 1,000 hours is 1,000 hours for the assessment to change, and the scans were already going home wrong. And somewhere on that flag deck, somebody was reading them and writing the word lattice on a slate. The plan did not need the cordon to be weak. It needed the cordon to be there, packed close, certain, in range. The day the Dominion stopped believing in bulk carriers was the day it would pull its ring back out of reach and stand off and take the convoy apart at its leisure, from a distance no drop booster could ever cross. And you cannot drown a fleet that has stepped out of the water. That was the wall. Beat the net or crawl for 1,000 hours and arrive at an empty ring with an empty convoy. Everyone had been trying to beat the net. At 3 in the morning ship time, in the wardroom that doubled as the problem room, with the flickering light and the cold coffee, and a whiteboard covered in 19 days of dead ideas, Chief Bo Anderson stood up, walked to the board, and drew a line through all of it. "We have been thinking about this wrong," he said. The 3 others in the room, Priya and 2 engineers, looked up with a particular exhaustion of people who have been thinking about a thing wrong for 19 days and suspected. Anderson was 61, a reactor chief who had spent his life not with weapons, but with power, with the boring, sacred arithmetic of how much energy a machine needs and where it comes from. And that was the reframe, because he had stopped looking at the net as a wall and started looking at it as a customer. "A net that big," he said, 400 buoys throwing a folding field across the whole outer marker. That is not a weapon. That is a power bill. Those buoys run on reactor mass, and they cannot run forever, and they cannot run everywhere at full strength at once. So they do not." He tapped the board. "We have been trying to punch through the field. We should have been reading the meter. When does it get cheap?" Priya was already at the board beside him, pulling up 19 days of passive scans, the boring telemetry no one had wanted. And there it was, hiding in plain sight the way the important thing always hides, in the data everyone had collected and no one had read for this. The buoys cycled. To conserve reactor mass across a shell 400 buoys wide, the net rotated its full strength around the ring in a slow wave. And any given arc of the marker dropped to a fraction of full field for a window of about 90 seconds every 11 hours, in a pattern so regular you could set a clock by it, because the Dominion had built the net to catch ships coming in hot from outside, and had never once imagined a ship already inside the volume, sitting still, reading the meter. Under a soft arc, on a quarter of rated field, for 90 seconds, the space went slack enough to fold through. It would not be comfortable. It would tear at the hulls, but it could be done. "We do not beat the net," Anderson said. "We read its power bill, and we walk through the door when the door is cheap." He capped the marker and sat down, and no one thanked him, and he did not want to be thanked, because it had not been him. It had been the room, 19 days of the room. And he would say exactly that every time anyone asked. Credit the group. We were thinking about it wrong until we weren't. They took the plan to Reyes at 8 that morning. Reyes listened to all of it without a word. And when it was done, he touched the drawer with the brass key in it. Once, and he said, "When is the next cheap window on the arc above us that puts us inside their ring when we come out?" Priya had the answer ready, because she had run it 4 times before she believed it. "There is a window in 7 hours, she said, "and one every 11 hours after that, and we cannot use the first 4 of them. 90 seconds of fold takes us exactly as far as 90 seconds of fold takes us, and at our present range, the first 4 windows put us out in open space, short of the ring, in front of their guns, with our doors open. The 5th window is the first one where the geometry closes, 51 hours. Reyes nodded slowly. "Then in 51 hours, he said, we stop crawling and we fold the whole convoy in 90 seconds, through a door they do not know is open, into the one place their doctrine says we can never be, inside their own net, inside the ring, at knife range. And then we are not yet, Priya said, and something in the room that had been cold for 19 days warmed by a single degree. 51 hours later, at 1100 hours on the 21st day, in the cheap 90-second window, under an arc running at a quarter of its rated field, 56 hulls, 54 carriers in 2 tugs, folded space and translated inward all at once. A maneuver Sarkoth Dominion doctrine held to be flatly impossible, and the net clawed at them and tore plating off their flanks and killed 1 tug outright, and 55 came through. On the flag deck of the Sarkoth Khan, alarms sounded that had never sounded in 11 months. Keswick came out of a thin sleep to a report that made no sense, that could not be true, that violated the single fact the entire siege rested upon. "War Master," said Vor, and his careful voice was not careful anymore. The convoy folded. Inside the field, inside the marker, they are in the middle of the ring. Keswick stood at the plot and looked at 55 amber shapes that were suddenly, impossibly in the water with him. Close, so close, and he felt the whole 11 months of certainty go out from under him like a deck in a hard turn. "How?" he said. "We do not know how," Vor said. "The net held. It should have held." And then Reader Asa, who had come running to the flag deck in her pale academy sash, with her battered tablet clutched to her chest, said, from the doorway, in a voice that carried across the whole shocked deck, "They read the power bill, War Master. They waited for the field to cycle cheap, and they folded through the door we have been leaving open every 11 hours for a minute and a half for 11 months. I did not think of it either, but I told you they were never fools about logistics." And Keswick, staring at the impossible plot, at the freighters inside his net, said the only thing there was to say, and he said it very quietly. "Battle stations," he said, "all squadrons, turn the guns inward." And somewhere in the dark, on 54 cargo carriers, 37,800 cell doors began, very slowly, to open. And the Dominion still did not understand what it was looking at, and it had at last no time left to learn. The reveal came at 11:40 on the 21st day, and it came all at once, and afterward the survivors on both sides would describe it in almost the same words, which is rare because they had almost nothing else in common. The Dominion cordon turned its guns inward. 214 warships, strung in a ring built to face outward at things trying to get in, now had to reverse their entire orientation to face 55 freighters that had appeared in the one place the ring could not cover, the soft inner space the net was supposed to keep empty. It takes time for 200 ships to turn a ring inside out. It takes 40 minutes. Reyes had spent 19 years buying those 40 minutes, and now he spent them all at once. On the flagship Providence, in the ugly, flickering light, Commodore Elias Reyes watched the range close, and watched the Dominion squadrons begin their ponderous turn, and touched the drawer with the brass key one last time, and did not open it. Priya Nandakumar said, "All bays report ready, Commodore." 55 hulls, 54 of them carriers, 37,800 cells armed and cycled. Reyes looked at the number that had lived inside his career, and he did not make a speech. He had never made a speech in his life. He said 2 words, and they were not the 2 words he had been saying for 20 days. And every officer on the deck knew the instant they heard them that the waiting was over. "Not yet," he had said, "for 20 days. Now," he said. 54 carriers opened 37,800 cell doors. 37,800 standard cargo modules came off the rails in one rolling salvo, every rack in the convoy cycling at once, 40 seconds from the first box to the last, and 4 minutes of flight after that. And to the sensors of the Sarkoth Dominion, the whole inner volume of the cordon simply turned solid. a wall of cold, dumb freight falling toward 214 warships that had spent 11 months learning to kill things one at a time. The gunships opened fire. The point defense did what it was built to do, and it was very good, and it killed boxes by the thousand, and it did not matter. A gun can kill so many targets a minute. That is a real number. 30 tracks a minute a hull by their own manual. 4 minutes of flight, 214 hulls, better than a third of them still hauling their broadsides around to face inward and tracking nothing at all. 25,000 at the theoretical ceiling, perhaps 16,000 in the world as it actually was, against 37,800. And everyone in the Dominion who understood arithmetic understood in the same instant exactly how the siege was going to end. And it was not going to end in a battle. It was going to end in a subtraction. The flood arrived. It did not arrive like a battle. It arrived like weather. The first Dominion warship to die was a gunship on the inner arc, and it did not explode so much as come apart, struck by 4 modules, and then 11, and then a number no one counted, each one 20 tons of sintered slag in a plain steel box, moving faster than thought. And there was no shield built to stop that many hard, cheap things at once, because no one had ever needed one. Because for 11 months the Dominion had faced things that came at it one at a time. A cruiser died. A frigate died. A gunship trying to turn out of the flood took freight along its whole exposed flank and folded in the middle like wet paper. On the flag deck of the Sarkoth Khan, the plot was a horror of falling amber and dying gold. And the reports came in faster than the officers could read them, and Sub-Warden Vore stood at his commander's side and said, in a voice gone flat with shock, "War Master, we are losing the inner squadron, all of it." Keswick did not answer right away. He was watching the plot, and he was thinking, with the cold, clear part of his mind that had never once failed him, and had chosen the wrong day to keep working, that Reader Asa had been right in the first council, and right in the fourth, and right in the corridor, and that being right had saved no one on his side, because he had not believed her, because the assessment stood. "Get me the directorate," he said. And while the message crawled across 9 hours of dark, the Dominion cordon died in 4 minutes of it. The second salvo came before the first had finished, then the third. The carriers, tubes empty, fell back behind the surviving tug and cycled the next load up out of the magazines. Because a cargo ship is mostly magazine and always has been. And where the Dominion had imagined 60 helpless merchants, it found 54 holds, with 3 more loads racked behind the first. Reader Asa stood at the back of the flag deck and watched the ring she had warned them about come apart. And she felt no vindication at all, only a vast and specific grief, because she could see, on the plot, the individual ships, and she knew some of the names. And a warship is not a number when it is dying. A warship is 400 living beings. And she watched 400 and 400 and 400 wink out and could not stop doing the arithmetic that turned the numbers back into people. Somewhere in the flood, aboard the freighter Ardent, in Cargo Bay 4, the automatic loader on the last cell rack failed, a cheap surplus motor that finally gave out at the worst moment, and 30 modules sat dead in their guides with no way to cycle. And Saul Ferraro, who had bandaged his arm 20 days before and never mentioned it, put his shoulder to the manual crank that no one was ever supposed to need, and he cranked the rack by hand 30 times, his ruined arm screaming, sweat freezing on his face in the cold bay. And he put the last 30 boxes of Bay 4 over the rail one at a time by muscle, and never told anyone, and went back to work. "War Master," said Vore, "the flagship has taken hits. We are losing the outer squadron now. Orders." And Keswick, who had spent 11 months giving orders in the flattest voice he owned, opened his mouth to give the order that might have saved a fraction of his fleet, the order to scatter, to run outward for the marker, in the keyed lanes his own buoys held open for Dominion hulls. And the order came 4 minutes too late, because the freighters had reloaded, and the next flood was already in the sky, and the flag deck of the Sarkoth Khan shuddered under the first impact, and the lights went red, and Keswick gripped the edge of the plot and gave the order anyway, into a battle that was already over. "All ships," he said, "all ships." And then the deck tore, and the message never finished. And 9,000 kilometers away, Commodore Reyes watched 200 warships come apart on his plot and said nothing at all. The reckoning did not happen on the day of the battle. Great powers do not reckon on the day. They reckon when the last hope has been costed out and found wanting. And for the Sarkoth Dominion, that took 9 more days. The Corps War Directorate received War Master Keswick's final message, "All ships, unfinished," and it received, an hour behind it, the automated telemetry of a cordon dying. And it received, worst of all, silence. The silence of 214 warships that had stopped answering. And for the first day, the Directorate did what distant authorities do, which is disbelieve. It sent the assessment stands one more time into a battle that no longer existed, and the message arrived at a debris field and was received by no one. And that was the last time those 3 words were ever sent, though not the last time they would be heard. On the second day, the Directorate commissioned the honest number. It sent a fast courier to the edge of the Kesh system, a single ship with orders to look and not fight. And the courier looked, and the courier reported, and the report was read in a grave cold chamber 100 light-years away by persons who had never seen Meridian, and now never would without seeing it differently. Of 214 warships, the report said, 11 survived. 11. The cordon of the Kesh system, the pride of the Corward frontier, 11 months of patient avoidance, had been reduced to 11 hulls by a formation the Directorate's own assessment had classified as a relief convoy of bulk carriers. And the convoy, the report added, in the flat prose of couriers, had not withdrawn. It had resupplied the station. And here the report carried a detail that the Directorate read once, and then read twice, and then read a third time in silence. The relief cargo had not come off the 55 hulls that fought. It had come off a 60th hull, a single bulk carrier named Longshore, which had crossed the outer marker with the rest on the first day, and then shut down every system aboard her that made light or heat or noise, and coasted, cold and ballistic, for 20 days, on a line laid in before the convoy ever left human space, straight through the middle of a cordon of 214 warships that had been looking for her the entire time, and had 1,000 more interesting things to look at. She made her approach 4 hours after the shooting stopped. She lit one beacon, took a berth on the station's third ring, and put 22,000 tons of grain, medical stores, and water reclamation parts onto the dock in 11 hours, which is a year of food for 41,000 people, and which had been the whole point of the exercise from the first day of the first plan. 41,000 people, 30 days of food, now held a year of it. The battle had been the escort. The freighter had been the mission. And the 56 surviving hulls of Task Group Kestrel sat in orbit around Meridian, reloaded, patient, harmless-looking, exactly as harmless-looking as they had been on the first day, which was the detail that finally frightened the Directorate more than the casualty count, because it meant the weapon had not been spent. It had been demonstrated. They laid out the options in that grave, cold chamber, and they went through them one by one, the way institutions do when they are looking for the answer they have already decided against. "Reinforce," said one voice. "Send a second fleet, a real fleet, warships built to face the humans this time." And another voice asked the only question that mattered, which was, "Built to face what?" "We do not know what they have. We know what they showed us. A species that turns cargo ships into that does not show you the bottom of its bag. And how many freighters do they have, in all their yards, across all their worlds? We counted 60, and it cost us 200 ships." The reinforcement option died in the room. "Blockade the human shipping lanes in return," said a second voice, And a third answered, "With what? We just learned that their shipping is their fleet. We cannot tell their supply from their strength anymore." That was the whole lesson. That was the thing Reader Asa had put in front of Keswick in the first council. The thing about a warehouse and a wagon. And now it was read back to the directorate in the courier's report, quoted verbatim from Asa's own recorded concern, because someone in the Dominion bureaucracy, sorting the wreckage of the Kesh command for accountability, had found her filed dissent and attached it to the after-action. And there it was, in the grave cold chamber, the sentence that had been recorded and dismissed. "You are treating a warehouse like a wagon," it said. "That is the mistake these people are built to punish." The directorate read the 11-month-old warning of a junior academy reader it had never heard of, and there was nothing to say to it because it had already come true, in the most expensive possible way, on the largest possible scale. There is a particular silence that falls on a powerful body when it realizes it has been beaten not by a stronger power, but by a truer accounting. And that silence fell now. The last option was the one no great power ever wants, and every great power eventually reaches. Someone said it. "We open a channel," the voice said. "We asked to talk." And no one argued, because there was nothing left to argue with. The arithmetic had spoken, and the arithmetic did not belong to them anymore. The message went out to Meridian Station, to the human administration, and it was short, and it cost the Sarkoth Dominion more to send than anything it had sent in 11 months. And it said, "The Dominion requests terms." Aboard the flagship Providence, Commodore Reyes read it in the ugly flickering light, and he did not celebrate, and he did not smile, and he did not touch the drawer. He read it 3 times. Then he handed the slate to the officer beside him and said, "Get me the envoy." And in a cold chamber 100 light-years away, an impatient sub-commander named Scar, who had commanded one of the 11 surviving warships and had spent the battle charging the freighters against the standing order to hold the ring and losing half his squadron for nothing, read a reprimand for his unauthorized attack, and read it 3 times and concluded, wrongly, in the way his kind always concludes, that he had been the only one on the whole cordon willing to fight, and that if the others had charged as he had charged, the day would have gone differently. He was removed from command the following week. He never understood why. The Convoy held its orbit, the station ate, and the Dominion, for the first time in its history, waited to hear the terms of a power it had classified, filed, and never thought to update, and the door of the negotiation chamber, in the days to come, was about to open on a conversation that would decide not who had won, which everyone already knew, but what the winning would be allowed to mean. The terms were negotiated over 11 days in a bare room aboard Meridian Station, and the woman who negotiated them for the humans gave away almost everything and refused in the end to give away the one thing that mattered. Her name was Adeze Okoro, and she was an envoy of the Meridian Compact. And she was not what the Dominion delegation expected, because they expected a conqueror and they got an accountant. She arrived at the table with a thin folder and a plain manner, and she was polite, genuinely polite, in a way that unsettled the Dominion negotiators more than any threat could have. The room they met in was as ugly as every other important room in this story. It was a decommissioned cargo office on the station's 3rd ring, chosen because it was neutral and empty, and it had a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a bird that no one had cleaned in 11 months of siege because there had been more important things than ceilings. And both delegations sat under that stain for 11 days and decided the shape of the frontier. Okoro conceded 4 things, cheerfully, one after another. She conceded that the Dominion could withdraw its 11 surviving ships unmolested, with full honors, which cost the humans nothing and let the Dominion keep the shape of its dignity. She conceded a demilitarized band along the disputed arc, wider than the compact wanted, because a wide empty band was cheaper than a narrow contested one. She conceded joint navigation rights through the Kesh transit, which the Dominion valued and the humans barely used. And she conceded that the after-action record would describe the battle in neutral language. No boasting, no accusation, a clean, dry account that let the Dominion tell its own people whatever it needed to tell them. 4 concessions in 4 days, each one given warmly, each one a small thing dressed as a large one, and the Dominion delegation began to relax, began to believe this would be a soft peace, a peace they could survive with their frontier and their pride intact. On the 5th day, they learned they were wrong, because on the 5th day, Okoro opened the thin folder and laid 2 sheets on the table. The first was a single page of the flag log of the Sarkoth Khan, cut out of the wreck by the salvage crews who had worked the debris field, carrying one entry timed at 1109 on the first day of the crossing, 6 words long. Request for inspection denied. Cordon holds. She said nothing at all about it. She simply left it where everyone at the table could read it. Then she laid down the second sheet and said, "And this one is not for discussion." The second sheet was a clause. It was 1 paragraph long. It said that the Sarkoth Dominion would formally and permanently enter into its own records, its true records, the ones its own historians read, an acknowledgement that the siege of Meridian had been unlawful, that the 3 relief convoys destroyed at the outer marker had been civilian and lawful, and that the 22 ships and the crews aboard them had been killed in violation of the accords the Dominion itself had signed. And it required the return of the surviving prisoners taken from those convoys. 41 crew held for 11 months in a Dominion detention station, returned by name, each name read into the record. That was the whole demand. Not territory, not reparations. A sentence in a book and 41 people by name. The Dominion delegation objected for 6 days. They offered Okoro everything to remove it. They offered reparations in full, the disputed arc entire, transit fees, a formal state gift, anything, everything to keep that one clause out of their permanent record. Because a delegation understands better than anyone that terms outlive the people who sign them, and that a frontier can be retaken, but a sentence in your own history cannot be unwritten, and that the clause would sit in the Dominion's true records forever, teaching every future Dominion officer the one lesson the Dominion most wished to forget. And Okoro, who had cheerfully given away 4 things worth far more in any ledger, declined the bribe, and declined it again, and declined it a 4th time, always politely, always the same, and it was possibly the most courteous refusal in the history of the frontier. On the 9th day, in the only part of the whole negotiation that happened without aids and without a recording, the senior Dominion negotiator, a tired, grave person named Selk, asked Okoro to stay behind after the session, and the 2 of them sat alone under the bird-shaped water stain, and Selk asked the question plainly, the only time in the whole affair that anyone said the true thing out loud. "Why this?" Selk said. "You gave us the Ark. You gave us our ships and our honor and our story. Why fight us to the wall over 1 paragraph we did not even want the galaxy to see? It is our record. It is private. Who does it even serve?" And Okoro was quiet for a moment, and then she told the truth, which is a rare thing at a negotiating table. "Because you filed us," she said. 20 years ago you fought us and you beat us, and you wrote us down as a slow, poor logistics species, and you put that in your records, and you never looked at it again, and that file killed 200 of your own ships, because a power that stops looking at what it wrote down stops being able to see. The clause is not to shame you. The clause is so that the next time one of your officers reads the file on the humans, the file argues back, so that the record cannot go stale again. We are not asking you to remember that you lost. We are asking you to remember that you were wrong, which is a different and more useful thing. Selk looked at her for a long moment, and then Selk nodded, slowly, the nod of a professional who has just been given a fair reason for a hard thing, and said, "And the 41 names. Those are ours," Okoro said. "Those you return because they are people, and not because they are terms. And if you cannot see the difference, the clause will not save you anyway. On the 11th day, the Sarkoth Dominion signed. Selk signed the clause last and read the 41 names into the record personally, all of them, slowly. And when it was done, Okoro closed her thin folder and stood and shook Selk's hand and said, "Thank you," and meant it. And the war of the Kesh frontier was over, decided at last not by the flood in the sky, but by a single paragraph in 41 names, under a water stain shaped like a bird, in a room that no one ever bothered to clean. The consequences of the Kesh siege rippled outward for years, and they reached, in the end, people who had never heard of Meridian Station and could not have found it on a chart, because that is how the largest events travel, not as news but as arithmetic that other people are forced to redo. 3 border powers along the Corward frontier, who had spent a generation quietly deferring to the Dominion, read the after-action of the Kesh siege, the neutral, dry, official one, and then read the other one, the one that circulated the way true things always circulate, and they recalculated. The Thren Assembly, which had been on the edge of granting the Dominion basing rights, declined, politely, citing scheduling. The free ports of the Olin Reach, which had never dared price their transit above what the Dominion permitted, raised their rates the following year, and the Dominion paid them because the Dominion had learned, at the cost of 200 ships, that it could no longer tell a poor logistics power from a lethal one, and had lost the confidence to find out. None of these powers fired a shot. They simply looked at the frontier differently, the way you look differently at a quiet neighbor after you learn what is in their garage. And the whole balance of the Corward stars shifted by a few degrees, and it never shifted back. And almost no one who lived through the shift could have told you the name of the station where it started. Reader Osa survived the battle. She had been aboard the Sarkoth Khan when the flag deck tore, and she had been one of the few pulled living from the wreck by the human rescue crews who worked the debris field for 9 days afterward, because the humans, having drowned 200 ships, then spent 9 days fishing survivors out of the cold, which is a contradiction the story does not resolve and does not need to. She spent a year in a compact medical station, and then she went home to the Dominion, and she was, briefly, a figure of interest, the analyst who had been right, and the directorate summoned her to a grave cold chamber and told her, formally, that her assessment had been correct, that she had warned the fleet and the fleet had not listened, and that the record would reflect it. They told her she had been right, and Reader Osa, standing in the chamber where the assessment had stood, said the thing that was the true center of the whole affair, said it quietly, without triumph, because there was no triumph anywhere in it for her to feel. "Being right about a bad thing is not the same as winning," she said. "I was right, and 200 ships are dead, and I would trade every hour of being right to have been believed for one of them." Then she asked to be released from the fleet, and she was, and she took a teaching post at the academy that had trained her, and she taught, for the rest of her career, a single required course to every officer who passed through. And the course was about how to read a file that argues back, and how to update an assessment, and how to know the difference between a warehouse and a wagon. And she taught it in a plain voice to bored young officers who did not yet understand why it was required. And some of them, years later, on some other frontier, would understand all at once, and would be grateful, and would never tell her. Commodore Elias Reyes went home. That was the part he had kept in the drawer the whole time, the small brass house key, and it opened a door on a green world 400 light-years from Kesh, a narrow house on a hill with a garden gone to seed after 4 years of deployment. And he came home in the autumn and let himself in with the key he had touched 100 times on the flag deck and never once opened. And inside the house was quiet, and there was a note stuck to the cooling unit in the kitchen in his own handwriting from 4 years before, "Buy coffee." And he read it and set down his bag and stood in his own kitchen for a while, an old man in a quiet house. And then he went out to the garden and started pulling weeds, because the weeds did not know about Kesh and did not care that he had drowned a fleet, and there was something in that he needed. He did not talk about the battle. When people asked, and they asked, he changed the subject to the garden. He had commanded the largest logistics action in the history of the frontier, and he spent his retirement growing tomatoes, badly, and he counted it a fair trade. Saul Ferraro went back to the docks. His cousin on Meridian had lived, the hydroponics tech, and the two of them met on the station's third ring 3 weeks after the siege lifted, in a corridor near the cargo office with the bird-shaped stain, and she hugged him and cried and asked him what it had been like out there in the convoy that broke the siege. And Saul Ferraro, who had held a bay sealed under fire and cranked 30 boxes over the rail by hand with a ruined arm and never mentioned either, shrugged and said, "It was a lot of waiting mostly, and bad coffee." And then he asked her if the hydroponics were back up, because he was hungry, and they went and got something to eat, and he never told her, not that day and not ever, what he had done in Cargo Bay 4. Because to Saul Ferraro, it did not seem like a thing you told anyone. It seemed like the small, ordinary thing you did so that the people you love could have groceries. And he could not have explained, if you asked him, that 10,000 small, ordinary decisions exactly like his, made by people with no rank and no plan, were the entire reason the flood ever reached the sky at all. That was the thing about them that never translated into a briefing. Years later, a young archivist named Ren Halloran, compiling the oral history of the Kesh siege for the compact records, tracked down the survivors one by one, the old Commodore in his garden, the deckhand at the docks, the envoy in her retirement, and last of all, on a quiet campus 100 light-years away, the Dominion reader who taught the course about files that argue back. And Ren asked each of them the same question, the question every chronicler asks, which is, of all of it, what was the one decision that changed everything? And each of them gave a different answer. The Commodore said it was the 90-second window. The deckhand said he did not think he had made any decisions at all. The envoy said it was the clause. But it was reader Asa, old now, at the end of the interview, who set down her tea and thought for a long moment and gave Ren the answer that reframed the whole story. And Ren wrote it down word for word because she understood, as it was said to her, that it was the thesis of everything. The decision that changed everything, Asa said, was not made on either side during the battle. It was made 20 years before it, in a Dominion filing office, by someone whose name we will never know, who wrote down what the humans were and then closed the file. Every ship that died at Kesh died because of that closed file. The humans did not beat us with a weapon. They beat us with a warehouse. And the warehouse only worked because we had stopped counting what was in ours. She looked out the window at the young officers crossing the campus, none of whom knew who she was. And she said the last thing, the thing Ren Halloran put at the very end of the history, the thing that is carved now, in small letters, on a plain wall on Meridian Station where the relief crews are remembered. They came to starve a station, Asa said, and they lost a war. And they never understood that the danger was never the guns. It was the ships that carried the food. It was never just another supply convoy.